Okay, we are now going to look at an example of the United States under Donald Trump becoming reminiscent of sort of a weird mishmash of George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. I've talked about the differences between those two books, and this example is sort of a combination of the two. Vice President Mike Pence is now defending the deficits that Trump first said he would eliminate and later pretended weren't actually ballooning. Mike Pence now saying that the deficits are part of the massive economic growth plan that Donald Trump is running with in the economy. With this story, we can essentially agree never to talk about debt and deficit again if we don't want to, because it is almost like satire, Saturday Night Live level defense of the deficits that they say are terrible when it's a Democratic president, that they said they would eliminate, that they claimed didn't explode under Trump, even though they did. And now they are saying, right, yeah, well, the deficit is up and it's part of our plan and ultimately it's all going to work out. Here is Mike Pence on CNBC making this case. And we're going to do this as another sort of disinformation propaganda debunking where we'll go bit by bit, because there's so much here that's important to not allow yourself to be tricked with. So let's look at the first clip to start with.
The economy, certainly the numbers are very strong, and the unemployment numbers in particular very impressive. I wonder whether you feel, though, a little bit of the gloss of that impressiveness needs to be removed because of the deficit, the size of the deficit and the direction that it's heading.
Well, we saw in the last administration a doubling of the national debt.
Okay, so we actually have to stop it already. This guy is sick. This guy's a sick liar. Did you notice the bait and switch there? Pence was asked about the deficit, which has exploded under Donald Trump. And Mike Pence said, you know, under Obama, the debt doubled. This is a bait and switch, and it only works if you are an uninformed person on this issue. The deficit is the 1 year deficit or surplus for that year's budget. That adds to or takes away from the national debt. If you go into a year with $100 in debt and run a $10 deficit, your debt at the end of that second year becomes $110. If in the next year you reduce the deficit to $8, you've reduced the deficit by 20% from $10 to $8, but you've accumulated another $8 in total debt, meaning at the end of year two, you now have $118 in debt. A president can slow deficit growth or reverse it, but that can even still not pay off the debt in 4 years or even 8 years. So Barack Obama drastically slowed deficit growth. But of course, if you have a deficit at all, the debt keeps accumulating year over year. Pence was asked about the deficit going up under Donald Trump, which it did. And Pence says the debt went up under Barack Obama. He's a sick liar. Let's continue.
A doubling of the national debt. But we also saw an American economy that wasn't growing by more than 2%. It was the slowest economic recovery since the Great Depression.
Okay, so they claim again, Obama's recovery was a recovery, but it was a very slow recovery. It wasn't really a good one. This is also a lie. The stock market during Barack Obama's first 3 years performed better than the stock market during Donald Trump's first 3 years. Deficit growth slowed under Obama. Deficit growth exploded under Donald Trump. Job creation at the end of Barack Obama's presidency was actually stronger than what Trump has had so far. We're going to deal with that on tomorrow or Wednesday's program. So even more lies. Let's continue, because this continues to build up to this idea that, oh no, the deficits are just part of the growth plan that we have.
And the president came into office and he said, first and foremost, we have to restore growth. That's how we will deal with the long-term fiscal challenges facing our country, and deficits and debt are right in line. But it's first about getting this economy moving again. And we really do believe the trajectory of this economy, we're going to end the next year in the 3% range, which is what President Trump said back on the campaign trail in 2016.
So now Mike Pence is claiming Trump promised 3% GDP growth. And the reason that he's doing this, make no mistake, is because they just got the 2019 numbers and it was 2.9% GDP growth. So now Pence says Trump promised 3. This is a lie. Trump promised 4, 5, and even 6% GDP growth during the campaign. He promised it after being in office. Check out just one example of this.
Get it going the way I really want, where we have GDP getting up to 4, 5, and even 6%, because I think that's possible. If you look back in your notes, you'll say when I said 4%, people said that would be years. Well, it's turned out that I'm right, because without the hurricanes, this last quarter we would have hit 4%.
Mike Pence is pretending that Trump promised 3 and that they hit it or almost hit that goal. It's lies, lies, lies. Trump promised 4, Trump promised 5, Trump promised 6. So now we are finally getting to the conclusion, and you will notice that Pence doesn't even use the language deficit and debt. He just keeps referring to fiscal challenges, and he says growth is how we will deal with fiscal challenges. He's finally acknowledging the deficit explosion without actually saying he's acknowledging it, and saying growth is the plan.
Deficit as a percentage of GDP, though, has ticked up each year of this first term. Would you like to see it as a focus for the second term, if you win one, to change the direction of that?
Well, I think the president's been very clear, and we've sharpened our pencils on our budgets, and we'll continue to do that. And in a second term, we'll continue to address those issues. But President Trump really believes that the real long-term solution to the fiscal challenges in Washington, D.C. is making sure that the budget of every American is growing. And, real income, after-tax income for working families has actually increased by $5,000 a year in the last 3 years. And so the president's going to stay focused on a growing American economy. And once we get this economy rolling, we're going to continue to hold Congress to account. And we're going to work real hard, not just to get President Donald Trump 4 more years in the White House, but we're going to make sure that we have a Republican Senate and a Republican House to keep America growing and to deal with those long-term fiscal challenges.
So look at this. For decades, Republicans say the deficit's terrible. We've got to get a surplus. We've got to pay off the debt. We've got to cut everything and cut our way out of debt. Trump actually promises to pay off the debt within 8 years. Only the most uninformed person would buy that as a real possibility. Unfortunately, many of his voters were uninformed and they bought it. The deficit explodes. Trump says, well, the growth that my tax cuts are going to stimulate will reduce the deficit. Doesn't happen. Does the tax cuts, blows up the deficit anyway. The growth doesn't happen. They deny that the deficit has exploded. Now they can't deny it anymore. So they say, well, this is all part of the plan. And the eventual growth that the tax cuts are going to cause is going to deal with it. No economist worth their weight in salt, never mind gold, believes that that's going to happen. They have lost the right to ever talk about the debt and deficit again. Republicans in Washington care about the deficit when the president is a Democrat, and they stop caring 2 seconds after a Republican is in the Oval Office. This has been happening for a long time. I believe it started under Reagan, if not before. And if you look at this from a political standpoint, why would they stop? I mean, it's completely inconsistent. It's complete hypocrisy, but it doesn't hurt them. When it's useful to them to talk about debt and deficit, if a Democrat is the president, or if they want to claim that they are going to pay this off or pay that off, then they just do it and they get rewarded for it electorally. Then they blow up the deficit, and in some way they justify it, and people are either too stupid or willingly ignorant, and they just go along with it. With Bush, it was like, well, listen, we had to do this Iraq war, and that was expensive. We did? What do you mean we had to do it? We went after a country that had nothing to do with 9/11 and had no WMDs. That was we had to do it. What are you talking about? Under Trump, either you deny it's happening, as is increasingly popular, at least with my Trumpist followers. They say, no, the deficit is not up. Yeah, it is. Just find the reports. It's public information. Or they say in the longer term, in the medium term, the reasons that we have a larger deficit now are going to create all this growth and it'll all work out, which is just not happening. It's been years already and it's just not going to happen. Why would they stop doing it when it continues to be useful to them electorally? They won't stop doing it.